Would you still laugh at someone if you knew they could buy everything you own? Those were the words echoing in Ethan's mind as he stood outside the grand marble doors of the Windsor Ballroom, the place where his life was about to change forever. He adjusted his slightly wrinkled gray suit, the same one he'd worn to every job interview 5 years ago, back when life was simpler and far less cruel. Today, that same suit was about to become the reason people whispered, mocked, and judged him, without realizing the truth. Inside the hall, chandeliers sparkled like diamonds. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, men in designer tuxedos, women in shimmering gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries. It was the kind of wedding people posted about on social media, not out of joy, but envy. Lara's family was known for their wealth. Her father, Charles Montgomery, was the CEO of Montgomery Enterprises, a company valued at over $950 million. They were powerful, proud, and obsessed with image. And today, they were about to welcome into their family a man they believed was beneath them. As Ethan entered the ballroom, every eye turned. Conversation slowed. A few chuckles escaped. "Is that really the groom?" Someone whispered. "Where's his designer suit?" Another snickered. "Even the caterers are dressed better." Ethan heard every word, but he just smiled softly and walked forward, holding his head high. At the far end of the hall, Lara stood like a vision, her eyes bright, her smile warm, her heart pounding. She knew the man she was marrying was kind, loyal, and humble. She loved that he didn't care for wealth or status, but she also knew her parents didn't approve. Her mother leaned toward Charles. "Look at him, Charles," she said under her breath. "He didn't even rent a proper car. Who arrives to their own wedding in a 10-year-old sedan?" Charles scoffed. "It's fine. Let's get through this embarrassment and pray no reporters are watching." As the ceremony began, everything appeared picture perfect, except for the tension that filled the room. Every compliment came with a smirk. Every smile was laced with condescension. When the priest asked Ethan if he promised to love and cherish Lara for the rest of his life, he answered with such calm sincerity that a few guests even softened for a moment. But that peace shattered seconds later. During the dinner reception, Charles clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to make a small speech," he said, grinning in that way powerful men often do when they're about to belittle someone. The crowd fell silent. Ethan, ever respectful, nodded. Charles raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate love. But let's be honest. Love doesn't always make sense, does it?" Light laughter, he continued. "My daughter, Lara, has always had a generous heart. So generous that she found love in a place none of us expected." A few guests chuckled. Ethan's expression didn't change. Charles smirked. "When I first met Ethan, I thought he was part of our staff." Laughter rippled across the room. "I even asked him to park my car," Charles added. He was polite enough to almost do it. The laughter grew louder. Lara's face turned red with anger. "Dad, stop," she whispered. But Charles wasn't done. "All jokes aside, we may not all understand Lara's choice. But hey, maybe love truly is blind." A few claps, a few sympathetic looks, 100 judging eyes. Ethan stood up slowly. "Thank you for your kind words, sir," he said, voice steady. "I may not have wealth to show, but I do have something money can't buy." "And what's that?" Charles asked sarcastically. "Self-respect," Ethan said. "And enough patience not to respond to insults. At least not today." The room went quiet. Lara squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "You didn't deserve that," she whispered. "It's okay," Ethan smiled softly. Let them think what they want. But deep down, Ethan felt the sting. He remembered the years of betrayal, the long nights rebuilding what others had taken from him. He had hidden his identity not to deceive, but to see who truly loved him beyond the surface. And now, as he looked around, he knew exactly who did. The wedding ended with formal smiles and fake blessings. Charles shook Ethan's hand stiffly. "I hope you can provide for her," he said coldly. "She's used to a certain lifestyle." Ethan smiled. "I'll make sure she's happy. That's all that matters." As the newlyweds drove away, the whispers continued behind them. "Let's see how long this marriage lasts. She'll regret it once the bills start piling up. He's probably after her inheritance. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that the quiet man they mocked wasn't a broke groom. He was the founder of Orion Technologies, the very company that had just finalized the acquisition of Montgomery Enterprises, and in less than 24 hours, Charles Montgomery would wake up to discover that his company, his pride, and his 950-meter empire now belonged to the man he publicly humiliated. Ethan glanced at Lara as they drove away. She looked at him lovingly, unaware of the storm about to come. "Ethan," she whispered, "thank you for not letting my father's words ruin our day." He smiled gently. "Don't worry, love. Some lessons life teaches better than words." She didn't understand what he meant, not yet, but she would, and so would everyone else, because tomorrow, the same family that mocked the groom for being beneath them would be kneeling before the man they once laughed at. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the penthouse windows, painting soft gold across the white sheets. Lara stirred beside Ethan, her head resting on his shoulder, her breathing gentle and even. To her, it was the start of a new life, a life built on love. To him, it was the calm before the storm. Ethan slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to wake her. He walked to the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The world was waking up, traffic below, people rushing to work, life moving forward, completely unaware that by evening, one of the city's biggest companies would change hands. He pulled out his phone. One message blinked at the top of his screen. "The deal is ready. All we need is your final confirmation. Daniel." Ethan typed back a single line. "Proceed." He slid his phone back into his pocket, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. For a brief second, he remembered everything. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation that started it all. Back then, Ethan wasn't the quiet man people saw now. He was confident, ambitious, and full of dreams. At just 27, he had built Orion Technologies, a small startup focused on software innovation. His goal was simple: to change how companies manage digital infrastructure. His ideas were fresh. Investors were skeptical, but one person believed in him, Charles Montgomery. When Ethan first met Charles, he was flattered. Charles saw potential in his software and promised to help him grow. "You're young, Ethan," he'd said with that same charming smile. "You have ideas. I have connections. Together we'll build something unstoppable." Ethan believed him. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Charles introduced him to wealthy investors, helped him secure contracts, and publicly praised him as a brilliant young mind. But Ethan didn't know. Charles's compliments were just the beginning of his plan. One night, after months of development, Ethan's team was ready to launch their flagship system. They were on the verge of signing their biggest deal yet, one that would put Orion on the map. But hours before the announcement, everything went wrong. His system files vanished. His investors pulled out, and within weeks, his patents were suddenly registered. Under Montgomery Enterprises, Ethan was crushed. When he confronted Charles, the older man didn't even pretend to deny it. He just smirked and said, "This is how business works, son. You had talent, but I have experience. You should have read the fine print." He'd signed away his intellectual property in a contract clause he didn't even realize existed. Montgomery Enterprises took everything: the software, the clients, the investors, and left Ethan bankrupt. The company Ethan built from scratch was gone. He spent months trying to fight back. But lawyers refused to help without payment. His name was blacklisted from the tech industry. By the end of the year, he had lost everything: his savings, his apartment, his reputation. Most people would have quit. Ethan didn't. After disappearing for months, Ethan resurfaced under a new identity: Ethan Cole. He moved to another city and started again from nothing. He freelanced as a coder, saved every dollar, and rebuilt his dream in secret. This time, he was smarter. He didn't tell anyone what he was creating. He worked quietly, relentlessly. Every night he coded until his hands ached. Every morning he woke up with the same promise: "I'll come back, but not for revenge." For justice, it took 3 years. His new company, Orion Technologies, Global, developed a cybersecurity system so advanced that governments and multinational corporations started signing exclusive contracts. Investors who once ignored him begged to buy shares. Within a year, Orion became one of the fastest-growing firms in the country, but Ethan stayed invisible. He never showed his face publicly. All business was handled by his trusted partner, Daniel, the only friend who knew the truth. While the world talked about Orion's mysterious billionaire founder, Ethan watched quietly from behind the curtain, waiting for the right moment. Then, one morning, Daniel walked into his office holding a file. "Ethan," he said, grinning, "you'll never believe who's desperate for a buyout." Ethan looked up from his desk. "Who?" "Montgomery Enterprises." Ethan froze. His heartbeat quickened. Charles Montgomery, the same man who stole his first company, was now on the verge of losing his own. Daniel continued. "Their share price is falling. Poor leadership. Bad investments. They're begging for an investor to save them." Ethan leaned back, emotion flickering in his eyes. "How poetic," he murmured. Daniel studied him. "What are you thinking?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm thinking it's time for a wedding." A few months later, fate, or perhaps irony, introduced Ethan to Lara Montgomery. It wasn't planned. Lara worked in the charity department of her father's company, completely detached from corporate politics. They met at a hospital fundraiser, where Ethan, under his new name, donated anonymously. She wasn't like the others. Where her family flaunted wealth, she spoke with humility. She treated everyone, from servers to CEOs, with equal kindness. Ethan was drawn to her, not knowing at first who she was. And when he finally discovered her last name, he didn't walk away. Something in him told him this was bigger than fate. It was destiny testing his heart. He never told her who he really was. To her, he was just Ethan Cole, a self-employed consultant with simple dreams. As months turned into years, their bond deepened. Lara didn't care about money. She loved him for his patience, for his humility, for his quiet strength. For the first time since his downfall, Ethan felt peace. But every love story faces a test. When Lara introduced Ethan to her father, Charles didn't recognize him at first. He saw only what Ethan wanted him to see. A modest man with no background, no influence. And Charles, as arrogant as ever, dismissed him immediately. "Lara, darling," he said after their first dinner, "you're a Montgomery. You don't marry men who still wear the same watch from college." Lara defended him fiercely, but Charles wouldn't listen. "He's after your money," he said. "I know his type." Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. That night, Ethan told Daniel, "We proceed with the buyout. Quietly. No one must know until it's done." Over the next 6 months, Ethan finalized the acquisition. He bought majority shares in Montgomery Enterprises through a chain of holding companies, keeping his identity completely hidden. By the time the wedding was announced, the company's fate was sealed. All that was left was the signature. His signature. Daniel warned him, "You sure you want to do this now?" "You could have signed weeks ago," Ethan smiled. "No, I want to see his face when he learns who I am." "But not for revenge. For truth," Daniel nodded, understanding. "Then tomorrow, the world will know who Ethan Cole really is." Standing on the balcony, Ethan's phone buzzed again. Daniel had sent the confirmation. The company was now officially his. He looked out at the skyline, whispering to himself, "Justice doesn't need noise. Just timing." Behind him, Lara's voice broke his thoughts. "Ethan," she said softly. "You're up early," he turned, smiling. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." She walked to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You don't need to prove anything to my parents. They'll see who you are one day." He looked down at her, the one person who had no idea she'd just married the new owner of her father's empire. "I know," he said quietly. "They will." She kissed his cheek and left to prepare for the post-wedding lunch with her family. Ethan stayed there for a long time, staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, he didn't feel angry. He felt free. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just be the groom they mocked. He would be the billionaire who changed everything. Not with vengeance, but with grace. The Montgomery estate was a palace of glass and arrogance. From the marble driveway to the silver chandeliers, everything screamed wealth, the kind of wealth that believed itself untouchable. The post-wedding brunch was supposed to be a small family gathering, but when Ethan and Lara arrived, the courtyard was filled with hundreds of guests, cameras flashing, champagne flowing, and the Montgomery logo glittering across the massive stage backdrop. Ethan stepped out of the car, adjusting his tie, his expression calm, beside him. Lara squeezed his hand. "Just ignore them," she whispered. "They can be difficult," he smiled faintly. "I've handled worse." He had, far worse. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with gossip. Every corner of the room buzzed with whispers about the mystery husband, the cheap tuxedo, the nobody who married into millions. Catherine Montgomery, Lara's mother, was the first to approach them, her pearls glinting under the chandelier. "Lara, darling," she said sweetly, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You look radiant." "And Ethan," she gave him a once-over that felt like a security scan. "Well, you're here," Ethan nodded politely. "It's good to see you again, Mrs. Montgomery." "I'm sure it is," she said with a thin smile. "Now, why don't you go greet the guests while I have a word with my daughter?" Lara frowned. "Mother, it'll just take a second." Ethan nodded. "It's okay. I'll be right over there." As he walked away, Catherine turned to her daughter, lowering her voice. "Lara, dear, you're my only child. I want what's best for you. You can't possibly expect this marriage to last." "Mother, stop," Lara said firmly. "You don't know him." "Oh, I know exactly his type," Catherine hissed. Quiet, polite, pretending not to care about money. "It's always the same story. They act humble, marry into wealth, then drain it dry." Lara's voice trembled. "He's not like that. He's kind. He's genuine," her mother sighed dramatically. "And broke." "Don't forget broke." Lara's eyes burned with tears, but before she could respond, Charles Montgomery entered the room, tall, silver-haired, his voice booming like a politician addressing his crowd. "There's the happy couple," he declared. "Come, everyone, gather around." People turned, clapping politely as Charles raised his glass. "To my daughter and her husband." He paused deliberately before the last word. "May their union bring happiness, and maybe a little financial stability." Laughter rippled through the room. Lara's face flushed with embarrassment. Ethan said nothing. He just smiled, calm, composed, the same way he had when Charles stole his company years ago. Charles clapped him on the shoulder. "Ethan, my boy, tell us, what do you do again?" "Consulting, was it?" "Yes," Ethan said mildly. "I manage acquisitions and restructuring." "Ah," Charles said, feigning interest. "Sounds important. Do you work for anyone I'd know?" Ethan met his eyes, unblinking. "You might, actually." "Really? Which firm?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Let's save that surprise for later." "I wouldn't want to spoil brunch." The crowd chuckled politely. Charles forced a laugh, though something about Ethan's calm unnerved him. He didn't like not being in control of the conversation. As lunch was served, the speeches began. Catherine went first, of course, because Catherine always went first. "When Ethan joined our family," she said, standing with her champagne flute raised, "we were surprised." The crowd tittered. "He's humble, unassuming, and, how should I put this, financially?" Refreshing, more laughter. Lara's jaw clenched. Ethan remained perfectly still. "But," Catherine continued, "we Montgomerys believe in giving back. Sometimes charity comes in unexpected forms." A few people gasped. Even Charles gave her a warning glance, but Catherine just smiled wider. "To the man who taught us that love truly is blind, and possibly broke, cheers." Glasses clinked. The room erupted in laughter. Lara's voice trembled. "Mother, that's enough." But before she could say more, Charles stood up, laughing. "Oh, don't take it so seriously, darling. We're just having fun. Besides, your husband knows how to take a joke." "Right, Ethan?" All eyes turned to him. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He simply looked at Charles, at Catherine, at the rows of smug faces watching him like spectators at a circus. Then he smiled. "You're right," he said softly. "I can take a joke." He stood, his voice calm but commanding. "But I wonder if you can." The laughter stopped. Catherine's smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked sharply. Ethan turned to the audience. Since everyone's been so curious about who I am, maybe I should finally clear the air. Lara touched his arm, whispering urgently. Ethan, please, not like this. He gently removed her hand, his eyes kind. It's okay, Lara. They wanted a toast. Let's give them one they'll never forget. He lifted his glass. To the Montgomerys, the family that taught me what arrogance looks like when it thinks it's untouchable. Gasps filled the room. Charles narrowed his eyes. Watch yourself, son. Oh, I'm not your son, Ethan said softly. And you're not my father-in-law. Not anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, the massive screen behind them, which had been displaying wedding photos, changed. A logo appeared. Orion Technologies. Murmurs rippled through the room. Charles frowned. What's this? This, Ethan said, is the company you stole from me. Lara froze. What are you talking about? Ethan turned to her gently. 5 years ago, your father took everything from me, my work, my name, my future. He called it business. I called it betrayal. The room fell silent. Even the string quartet stopped playing. I rebuilt everything from nothing, Ethan continued. And yesterday, the final papers were signed. Montgomery Enterprises, your empire, now belongs to me. The room erupted in shocked gasps. Charles's face turned crimson. That's impossible, is it? Ethan swiped again. The screen displayed documents, signatures, corporate filings, all bearing his name. Finalized acquisition, Orion Technologies. Holdings acquires Montgomery Enterprises. $950 million. Ethan looked directly at Charles. You see, while you were busy laughing at me, I was buying every piece of your empire, one share at a time. Catherine's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Charles stared at the screen, disbelief turning to rage. You think this little stunt will humiliate me? I built this company. No, Ethan said quietly. You built it on lies, on theft, on the backs of people you crushed for power. I was one of them, he turned to the guests. 5 years ago, this man stole my software and registered it under his name. He destroyed my career and called it business. He taught me everything I needed to know about greed, and today I taught him about consequences. Phones came out. Cameras started rolling. Catherine's face drained of color. Security! Charles barked. Turn this off! Ethan smiled calmly. You might want to check with your board before you do that. What are you talking about? I own your board, Ethan said simply. They're the ones who invited me to finalize the deal. Here, at your lovely brunch. Lara stood, trembling. Ethan, please. Tell me this isn't real. He turned to her, his expression softening. It's real, Lara, but not the way it looks. I didn't marry you for revenge. I married you because I love you. And because I couldn't let your father ruin anyone else's life the way he ruined mine. Tears filled her eyes. You should have told me. I wanted to, he whispered. But I needed to finish what he started. Charles slammed his hand on the table. You'll regret this. I'll destroy you. Ethan looked at him calm as ever. You already tried. He pulled out one more document, a motion from the Securities Commission. By the way, your accounting adjustments for the past decade, they're under federal review. The investigation starts tomorrow. Catherine stumbled backward, gripping her chair. Charles, what is he talking about? But Charles said nothing. His silence said everything. In minutes, chaos broke out. Guests whispered. Reporters called their offices. And within an hour, social media was flooded with headlines. Montgomery Empire sold in secret buyout. Billionaire Groom shocks family with $915. Acquisition. Wedding turns into corporate takedown. Ethan walked out of the hall as flashbulbs exploded behind him. He didn't look back. Lara followed, tears streaking her face. Ethan, please wait. He stopped at the steps outside the estate, turning to her. Lara, I know this hurts. But your father, I know what my father did, she whispered. But I wish you'd trusted me to stand beside you. He sighed, his voice low. You're right. I should have. She stepped closer, searching his face. So what happens now? He looked up at the mansion behind her, the symbol of everything that once destroyed him. Now, he said softly, the truth does what it always does. It burns away the lies. He handed her an envelope. This is for you. She opened it. divorce papers. Her heart sank. "You're leaving me?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm setting you free from your father's name. You don't deserve his sins." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "What about us?" He smiled sadly. "When the ashes settle, maybe we'll find each other again." He turned, walking toward the waiting car. The cameras flashed. Reporters shouted his name, but all he heard was Lara's voice behind him, soft, breaking, and full of love. "Ethan, please don't let this be the end." He paused just long enough to whisper, "It's not the end. It's the beginning." And then he was gone. The morning after the revelation was unlike any morning the Montgomerys had ever experienced. Gone were the butlers, the laughter, the phone calls from admirers. All that remained was silence and headlines. Montgomery empire collapses overnight after secret 950-meter takeover. Bride's family mocked Groom, unaware he owned their company. Society's power couple falls from grace. Every television, every website, every talk show dissected the same story, the shocking twist that no one saw coming. The world had turned their arrogance into entertainment. Inside the Montgomery mansion, Catherine sat motionless at the dining table, a newspaper trembling in her hands. She had read the same article a dozen times, hoping the words might change. Charles stormed into the room, his tie undone, his voice raw. "They're freezing my accounts," he said. "Every contract, every client, gone. The board refuses to take my calls." Catherine looked up weakly. "What are we going to do?" He slammed his fist on the table. "We'll fight it." "We'll sue him." "Sue him for what?" she snapped. "For buying what you sold?" He glared at her. "You think this is my fault?" "I think you made an enemy of a man you should have respected," she said bitterly. "And you used our daughter to cover it up." Her words hit harder than she intended. For the first time in years, Charles said nothing. Upstairs, Lara sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone, scrolling through endless messages, sympathy from friends, curiosity from strangers, and reporters begging for her side of the story. She ignored them all. She opened the last message Ethan had sent her before leaving. "When truth hurts, remember, it's only painful because it's real." Tears blurred her vision. She replayed the wedding day in her mind, his calm smile, his quiet dignity while her family mocked him, his voice trembling when he said, "I love you." How could she not have seen it? Her mother entered the room quietly. "Lara," she said softly, "you should eat something." "I'm not hungry." Catherine hesitated, her usual sharpness gone. "I didn't mean for things to go this far." Lara looked up, her eyes red. "You humiliated him, Mother. You called him poor, selfish, worthless, in front of everyone." Catherine's lips trembled. "I didn't know who he was." "That's the point," Lara whispered. "You didn't care who he was. You just cared about what he had." Her mother looked away. "I thought I was protecting you. From what?" Lara snapped. "From love. From someone who actually treated me like I mattered." Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. Final. In a sleek high-rise office overlooking the city, Ethan stood by the window, staring at the skyline. The acquisition was complete. The empire that had crushed him now belonged to him entirely, and yet, the victory felt hollow. "Everything's finalized," said his assistant, Maya, stepping into the room. "The board has approved your transition plan." "The Montgomerys are officially out," Ethan nodded absently. "Thank you," Maya hesitated. "You don't look happy." He turned, his eyes distant. "I thought I would be. But it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like burying something I once loved." Maya studied him carefully. "You didn't just buy a company, Ethan. You exposed corruption. You did what had to be done." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes justice costs more than revenge ever could." She said nothing more. She'd known him long enough to see the pain behind his calm, the way he masked heartbreak with composure. Ethan walked to his desk and opened a small velvet box, the one that once held Lara's wedding ring. Inside was a note he'd written the night before their wedding. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I'll always choose love over pride." He folded it back slowly, his throat tightening. That afternoon, A journalist from Business Insider called him for an exclusive. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully. "The world wants to know, was this personal?" Ethan's voice was steady. "It started that way. But it ended with something bigger than me. Do you regret it?" He paused. "I regret that love and business collided the way they did. I regret hurting the one person who didn't deserve any of it. Your wife?" He hesitated. "My wife," he repeated softly. Yes, the interview went viral within hours. Viewers weren't just fascinated by the corporate twist. They were moved by the heartbreak in his tone. For the first time, Ethan wasn't the billionaire hero or the clever avenger. He was a man who'd lost something priceless while winning everything else. 2 weeks later, the Montgomery estate was listed for sale. The luxury cars disappeared from the driveway. Reporters camped outside the gates, documenting every fall from grace. Charles had been summoned for questioning by the Securities Commission. The financial irregularities Ethan hinted at turned out to be real. Decades of creative accounting, hidden subsidiaries and embezzlement. Catherine, once the epitome of high society, now avoided the public eye altogether. Their phones stopped ringing. Their friends stopped calling. In the end, all the laughter they'd once used to mock others came back to echo against their empty halls. But the deepest wound wasn't financial. It was personal. Lara barely spoke to her parents anymore. When she did, it was brief, cold, distant. She moved into a small apartment in the city, far from the noise, far from the press. All she wanted was peace and closure. One evening, she heard a knock at the door. She hesitated, her heart racing. When she opened it, Ethan stood there, tired, calm, holding a small box. "Ethan," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I hope it's not too late to say I'm sorry." Her eyes filled with tears. "You have nothing to apologize for. I should have defended you. I should have believed in you." He shook his head. "You believed in me more than anyone. That's why this hurts so much." He stepped inside. "I didn't mean for things to explode the way they did. I wanted the truth to come out, not to destroy everything you loved," she sighed. "Sometimes the truth destroys before it heals." For a moment they stood in silence. The world outside continued, cars passing, city lights glowing. But inside that small apartment, time felt frozen. Ethan handed her the box. "This belongs to you," she opened it. The same velvet ring box from their wedding. Inside, the ring gleamed under the soft light. "Why are you giving this back?" she whispered. "Because I want to start again," he said softly. No secrets, no revenge, just us. Lara's tears fell freely now. "And my parents, they'll face what's coming," he said quietly. "But I won't let their sins define who we are." She smiled through her tears. "That sounds like the man I fell in love with." He smiled too. For the first time in weeks it felt real. Then maybe there's still hope for us. The following morning, news spread that Charles Montgomery had been formally charged with fraud and tax evasion. Catherine issued a public apology, though most dismissed it as damage control. Ethan, however, refused to press additional charges. When asked why, he simply said, "Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." He reinstated hundreds of employees who had lost their jobs under Montgomery's corruption. He restructured the company to focus on innovation and ethics, the same values he once dreamed of when he first started Orion. And quietly, away from the cameras, he and Lara began rebuilding what they'd lost, one honest moment at a time. Months later, as the sun set over the city skyline, Ethan and Lara stood on the balcony of their new home, modest but peaceful. Lara leaned against him, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about that day? The wedding?" He chuckled faintly. "Every time I put on a suit." She smiled. "You know, they laughed at you because they thought you had nothing." He looked at her lovingly. "They were half right. I didn't have money that day, but I had something they'd never understand." "What's that?" He turned to her, his eyes warm. "Grace." 6 months had passed since the day the world watched the Montgomery empire crumble. The scandal that once dominated headlines had finally faded. The name Ethan Cole was no longer spoken with awe or fear, but with respect. He had become the symbol of poetic justice. The man who lost everything, stayed silent, and rebuilt his world without hate. But even success couldn't fill the quiet spaces in his heart, the ones only Lara could reach. Ethan now worked from a smaller office downtown. No gold accents, no fancy furniture, just clear windows and clean purpose. He had restructured Orion Technologies into a foundation that funded startups built by underprivileged entrepreneurs. When reporters asked why, he always said, "Because I know what it feels like to be dismissed for not looking wealthy enough." One afternoon, he was reviewing proposals when Maya, his assistant, knocked lightly. "There's someone here to see you," she said. Ethan didn't look up. "Tell them to schedule through my office." "She said you'd say that," Maya replied with a small smile. "But she also said you'd regret it if you didn't." Ethan froze. "She?" Maya nodded toward the doorway. And there she was, Lara. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy with everything left unsaid. Months of silence, pain, forgiveness waiting to be born. Finally, Ethan stood. "Lara?" She smiled softly. "You still say my name like it's a question." "Because I never know if you're staying or leaving," he said quietly. She walked closer, holding a small white envelope. "I didn't come here to stay, or to leave. I came here to return something." She placed the envelope on his desk. Inside was a photograph, the two of them on their wedding day. The one moment before the laughter started. "I kept this," she said. "Not because of what happened that day, but because of what it meant. We promised each other love without conditions. And I broke that first." He shook his head. "No, Lara. We both broke it. I let revenge share a table with love." She took a deep breath. Maybe we both needed to lose everything to understand what really mattered. He looked at her, really. Looked, not as the daughter of the people who betrayed him, not as a link to his past, but as the woman who stood by him when the world turned cruel. "You still wear the ring," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "I never took it off. It reminds me that love doesn't need perfect people. It just needs two who refuse to give up." He exhaled, his voice trembling. "Lara, I never wanted to destroy your family. I just wanted the truth. And you got it," she said. "But now it's time to build something new, together, if you'll let me." He hesitated, then reached out, taking her hand. "Only if you promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That we build it on forgiveness, not pride." Her eyes glistened. "Always." The second wedding, months later, invitations began to circulate quietly. No media, no reporters, no luxury branding this time. Just a simple card that read, "Ethan and Lara, 2 hearts, 1 second chance." The ceremony took place in a small garden overlooking the sea. Only a handful of close friends attended. There were no photographers, no million-dollar gowns, just sincerity. As Lara walked down the aisle, the wind caught her veil. And for a moment, Ethan thought of the first wedding, the one filled with whispers, judgment, and laughter. This time, there was only peace. When they exchanged vows, Lara's voice trembled. "I promise to love you, not for what you have, but for who you are when everything else fades." Ethan smiled, tears glimmering in his eyes. "And I promise to never hide behind my pain again." Because love isn't about proving a point. It's about healing one. The guests stood and clapped softly, some wiping tears. There was no extravagance, no drama, just truth. After the ceremony, while the newlyweds mingled, Maya approached Ethan. "There are 2 people outside," she whispered carefully. "They say they don't want to interrupt. Just watch from a distance." Ethan frowned slightly. Who? Maya tilted her head toward the garden gate. There stood Catherine and Charles Montgomery, dressed modestly, older somehow, their confidence replaced by humility. Ethan's expression hardened for a moment, then softened. Let them in. As they approached, Catherine spoke first. Ethan, we didn't come to cause trouble. I know, he said calmly. Charles cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. I came to apologize. For what I did. For what I took from you. Ethan didn't respond. He simply listened. Charles's eyes glistened. I lost everything I thought mattered. But watching my daughter stand by you, I realized what I'd truly lost years ago. My integrity. Catherine stepped forward, tears in her eyes. We were cruel to you, not because you weren't good enough, but because we were afraid of being less than someone we couldn't control. Lara stood beside Ethan, her hand trembling in his. Mom, Dad, this doesn't erase what happened, but I'm glad you're here. Ethan took a long breath. You both hurt me deeply. You took my work, my dignity, my peace. But in the end, that pain gave me something you never could have given me. Purpose. Charles bowed his head. I don't expect forgiveness. Ethan looked at him steadily. Then you'll never understand it. He extended his hand. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Charles's lips trembled. For the first time, the proud businessman looked small, human. Thank you, he whispered. Catherine wept silently, and Lara stepped forward, embracing her. For a moment, it felt like the past loosened its grip. Years later, Orion Foundation became one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the world, supporting young dreamers who'd once been mocked for their beginnings. At every event, Ethan and Lara told their story, not about betrayal or wealth, but about transformation. The world judged us, Ethan would say, and we judged it back, until we learned that true victory isn't when others lose, it's when love wins. Their journey became a viral lesson across platforms. Millions shared the story, not because of the 900-fundamental twist, but because it ended with forgiveness instead of revenge. Lara often looked at Ethan during interviews and smiled. Do you ever regret exposing them like that? He'd always answer the same way. If I hadn't, I might never have found out who I really was. One evening, years later, Ethan visited the old Montgomery estate, now renovated into an orphanage run by their foundation. Children played on the same lawns where once arrogance had reigned. He smiled as one little boy ran up to him. Mr. Cole, Miss Lara said you used to live here. Ethan knelt down, laughing softly. Not exactly, kiddo, but I learned a lot here. Like what? The boy asked, curious. He looked at the sunset above them, golden, forgiving, endless. That, sometimes the people who laugh at you are just afraid of seeing what you'll become. And if you stay kind, no matter how hard they try to break you, one day your grace will be louder than their laughter. The boy grinned. That sounds like a superpower. Ethan chuckled. It is. It's called forgiveness. Lara walked up behind them, slipping her arm around his. Ready to go home? He nodded, taking one last look at the house, not with anger, but gratitude. Funny, he murmured. The place that once tried to destroy me now gives hope to others. Lara smiled softly. That's what redemption looks like. They walked hand in hand toward the gates as the sun dipped low, bathing everything in gold. Because in the end, it wasn't money that changed their lives. It was mercy. It was love. It was the courage to forgive what the world said deserved revenge.